Somebody has a new sweater. Today, I want to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, and that is knitting speed and style. Hi guys, so today I want to talk to you guys about the sweater that I just recently finished, and I want to talk to you guys about something that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time, and that is something that we're all kind of obsessed with as knitters, and it's this idea of knitting speed and knitting styles. But before we get onto that, I want to first open some boxes. So it's a couple weeks before Christmas. It's the holidays. It's a crazy time in December. And I don't know about you, but when I get stressed out, I order yarn online. And so I have ordered some yarn from Maurice Brassard and also from Penelope Fiber Arts, which is local to us here. Look what I got. Okay, so before I get on to today's topic, I want to talk to you guys about a couple of things. The first thing is that I just received this in the mail, and they are knitting needles from Thiago. So I've never tried these needles before, but my friend Allison, who also works with us in the UK and all this kind of stuff, Allison has been talking about Thiago for months now, and she says, I have to try them. And so I've been looking at my needle situation, my knitting needle situation, and it's kind of a mess right now. And I want to talk about it in an upcoming episode of this podcast vlog thing. And before I do that, I want to give these ones a test. These are the Thiago Twist Minis and the Thiago Twist in red lace interchangeable. So basically, they are the lace tip needles that they have. They are the ones with the red cable, and they are the interchangeable ones. So I'm going to give these ones a try and then let you know what happens with the needle situation. Because before January or sometime in January, we need to do a clean. We need to do a cull. We need to clean out the needle box because it's kind of crazy right now. The second thing is that there's all this yarn on the table, and it's all white yarn. It's all cotton yarn. This one is actually wool. So 3 skeins of Harrisville Shetland yarn undyed. This was supposed to be for some blankets that I want to weave up. So this needs to get dyed. This would be dyed with acid dyes. And then I have this entire order of, it was 15 plus 4 plus 4. So that's like almost 25 skeins of this undyed white cotton or undyed cotton, and it comes in 3 different weights. Here I have it in the mop cotton weight, so this is like the really super thick one, 8 plies of 8/2. This is 4 plies of 16/2, so this is a 4/8 cotton, and then I also have a 2/16 cotton here. So I have all of this undyed cotton yarn here because as I've been planning for next year, 2018, one of the big things that I want to do is I want to start doing a lot more dyeing with both Procyon and with natural dyes because I want to start working more and more with cellulose fiber. I feel like that would be a really nice thing to be able to put on my loom, and I can mix that with wools and all sorts of things, but I just want to take this as an opportunity to start learning more and more about Procyon dyeing. And so that's why there's all this white yarn here. Following up with the blanket talk that I was talking about last week about wanting to make these mohair blankets, I did go to the studio last Friday and I did end up dyeing 6 big giant hanks of this 2,000 yards per pound mohair. And so you can see that these are the skeins, some of the skeins that I dyed up. This is a new color that we're going to come out with in the springtime. It's going to be called Lollipop, but I'm loving this pink. It's vivid and bright and saturated, but it's not neon, and oh, I love it. So this is going to be called Lollipop, and this is coming out in the spring, and I've dyed this on the mohair. I also dyed a couple of blue colors. So this is can't remember if this is clear water or white water, but this is one of the lighter blue colors that we have. So giant skein of mohair. And then I started to wind all of these skeins into balls, and there's 250 grams on each of these skeins. So I managed to wind them off into little balls like this. And so they look like there's about 50 grams of each one of these balls because there's about 5 of them. So yeah, I'm hoping to take 2 strands of this yarn and hold them together and warp them as if they were one and see what kind of result I can get. And so part of the idea is that I can also take different colors, and so maybe I can take one strand of one color and another strand of another color and hold those together and then see what kind of blend and effect I can get. So lots and lots of possibilities. I have 4 colors here. I still have 2 colors that were drying at the studio, and I have to go pick those up, and that was pumpkin, an orange color, and Deep Cove, which is darker than this color. So that's what I'm doing with the whole mohair blanket thing. It's just mohair everywhere right now. Also in knitting, I have been working on the Advent shawl, but it's in here, but I don't want to show it to you just in case you guys are still knitting it, and I don't want there to be any spoilers. Even though I'm 2 days behind everybody, I'm still not wanting to show you for fear that, you know. So no spoilers, but I'm working on it. It's going really, really well. There was I think after day 1, Tabitha and I woke up and there was all this chatter on Ravelry about people running out of yarn for each one of those little packets. And I was talking with Tabitha about this, and originally the idea was to use up every single last scrap of yarn, like every single last inch of yarn. And so in order for her instructions to work, obviously gauge is very, very important. You know, if you knit and use up a lot of yarn, then you're going to run out of yarn faster than somebody who knits maybe a little bit tighter and doesn't use as much yarn. And so I know that there was a lot of kind of like anxiety about running out of yarn and things like that. But Tabitha has reassured everybody that the pattern is designed as such where you can join on anywhere. And if you run out of yarn on one row, you can connect the next day's yarn and just keep working at it. And if you start to run really, really short of yarn, then there are some sections where you can skip a few rows. But I know I've read on Ravelry that there's actually one gal who's completely finished the shawl and she didn't have to cut out any rows. You know, there was some ebb and flow between the days and the yarn that was being used between those days. But in the end, it all worked out fine. And I'm really eager to see what the whole thing looks like and how it works up. One of the things that I think is really cool about this entire exercise is that not only do you have to be patient and wait for each day's mini skein to see what's going to happen, see what the instructions are each day. So there's there's definitely the aspect of having to wait and be patient. But then there's also this aspect of sort of being okay with uncertainty, being okay with, you know, different situations or different circumstances with your knitting. Like maybe you don't always have exactly the yarn that's specified in your pattern, and maybe you're not sure if you have exactly enough, but you know, what are the kinds of things that you can do to make sure that your project is going to finish the way that you want it to? And so I feel pretty confident that no matter how much I run out of yarn or whatever, there's going to be a way that I can resolve this challenge. Either I can pop in a little bit of yarn that I have maybe in my stash that's in a similar color and, you know, just fill in the gap if I need to, or I can cut out a couple of rows, or I can bind off early, or whatever it is. I feel really positive that no matter what happens, I'll be able to finish the project and I will be happy with how it turns out. So I'm really excited about, you know, going day by day and seeing how this all turns out. So finally, I can tell you a little bit about my cardigan. So this cardigan, I finished knitting it on Sunday. I finished knitting it on the weekend, and it was great and easy to knit, and I had to pick up the stitches in the back, and that worked out really, really fine and no problem. You can see it hangs quite nicely in the back. It's actually got quite a lot of drape. The only 2 seams are on the side here, And it's just this little section here that needs to get seamed, one section here, and then one on the other side. That's all there is for seaming, and otherwise it's super, super easy. I was a little bit concerned. I had watched Rachel Smith and Well for Pearls, her review of her cardigan, because she knit the Veronica as well, and she was having some trouble with the sweater not fitting properly, not hanging properly, not draping properly, and I was starting to get worried after I finished knitting mine because I wasn't sure. I tried it on a couple times and I wasn't sure if it was gonna be big enough, but actually after I wet blocked it, the whole thing relaxed so much and stretched out significantly, and then became so much more soft and drapey than it had been as I was knitting it. When I was knitting it, it was very spongy and bouncy, but then as soon as I washed it and wet blocked it, the whole thing just flattened out and it looked really great. And so now there's a lot of weight to the garment. It drapes really nicely and it's soft. And yeah, I'm really excited about this one. So I can kind of envision myself wearing this a lot. It just kind of can go over anything, over a t-shirt, over whatever. But yeah, I'm really excited about this. So I'll tell you that the reason for today's topic, speed and style, is because I was knitting this while I was on the Knitters Retreat a couple of weeks ago. And I remember one of the comments that people made while we were sitting around and knitting in front of the fireplace and things like that. They were talking about how I was just like motoring along, like how I was getting quite a good clip on my knitting. And then I thought about it some more, like I've been knitting since I was in grade school, and at one point in time in about grade 7, I really forced myself to learn how to watch TV and knit at the same time and not look down at my stitches. And so just with that practice, I think I started to develop a little bit more speed. But I've never been like a crazy, super fast knitter. Like I've seen lots of knitters who are crazy, super fast, like Uni Zhang, who used to be the editor of Interweave magazine, Interweave Knits magazine. If you've ever seen her knit, she knits super fast. There's a couple of gals that I know who I've watched just knit furiously and effortlessly and so quick with their fingers, and it's amazing. I personally love watching people knit. It's fascinating. I like watching how people tension their yarn. I like watching how people hold their needles, because everybody knits differently. Everybody holds their needles differently. Everybody holds their yarn differently. And I just find it the most fascinating thing, because everybody gets, whatever speed that they happen to get out of that. And so even two people who hold their yarn the same way, knit the same way, hold their needles the same way, might have completely different speeds when they knit. But I know this topic is super popular, because out of the 700 or 800 blog posts that we've written on the SweetGeorgia blog since 2004, the number one most popular blog post of all time is the post that I wrote about speed knitting when I took the speed knitting class with the Yarn Harlot, or Stephanie Pearl McPhee. So this was years and years ago, and I took this workshop when I was at Vogue Knitting Live in New York and with Stephanie, and it was all about learning her style of knitting, which is Irish lever knitting, and she's super fast with her knitting style. And but I learned a lot of things out of that one workshop about how you can improve your knitting speed. And so I wanted to share with you guys a couple of points that I think about when I think about trying to improve my knitting speed. And a lot of these tips are really simple to do and don't require you to change your knitting style at all. So I've just cast on 25 stitches here, and I'm just going to knit a little bit and then talk to you about different things that you can do to help improve your speed. You know what? I'm going to try out my new knitting needles. Okay, so one of the very first things that you can think about when you're thinking about trying to increase your speed with your knitting is the material of your knitting needle. So I just switched from the bamboo needles that I was using originally, and I switched to these stainless steel ones. For years now, I've been using the Addy sock rockets, which are nickel plated, and those are really super slick and fast. And so sometimes your knitting speed can be related to the materials and how much friction there is between the knitting needle and the yarn. So the material that the knitting needle is made out of can cause increased drag or friction as you're trying to work your stitches, and can actually kind of slow you down a little bit or require you to use more force in getting those stitches up. So one of the other things that I think about as I'm knitting and trying to increase my knitting speed is to try to make sure that all of your stitches are available and ready to be knit. And so what I mean by that is to squish all your stitches up to near the front of your needle, because if you have them all spread out along your needle, and then as you're knitting each stitch, you're having to push a little bit along to push your stitches along. If you push all of your stitches up close to the front of your needle, close to the tip of your needle, then they'll be there when you need to knit them, and then you can minimize the distance that your needle needs to travel in order to get to those stitches. So the next thing to do is to try to minimize your movements. So that means that if you are knitting, to try to keep all of your hand motions, all of your throwing motions, all of your picking motions, whatever motions you're doing for your knitting, to keep them as small and as tight as possible. If you knit close to the very tips of your needles, I find that it can actually affect your gauge, because you're not forming the stitches on the round part of the needle. You're forming them near the tip, which is a smaller diameter. So you do want to make sure that when you're forming the stitches, you are forming them on the actual needle part of the knitting needle and not the tip part. But at the same time, you can try and minimize your movements as much as possible. So I could exaggerate my movements like this. If I was to be throwing like this, I would definitely be losing time. But I just try to keep my hand motions as close as possible, and I don't let go of my needle. If you let go of your needle, then you're going to have to spend time collecting it, picking it back up. So I just try to keep my motions as smooth and as tight and small as possible. So I'm going to show you how I generally knit. I have my stitches all pushed up close to the tip of the left-hand needle, and I generally knit English style. So that's throwing. That means that I have the yarn in my right hand. I tension it through my fingers on my right hand. So that looks kind of like this. Now, what I try to do is keep all these stitches pushed up towards the tip of the left-hand needle so that they're accessible when I need them. The other thing that I try to do is I minimize the distance between the stitch and the yarn on this finger that's tensioned on this finger. I don't want the yarn to be all out here and have a big long length of yarn, because then when I go to make the stitch, then it requires a much bigger movement to make that stitch, and that can really mess with how much time you spend knitting, and it can also hurt your arm over a long period of time. So I just try to keep this minimized and as small of a distance as possible. That's generally how I knit. I hold onto the needle very lightly with my ring finger on the right hand. So I never really fully drop it, because dropping and picking up your needle again, that can also take time. So I hold on to the underside of this needle with my ring finger. So here is how I purl. So again, holding my yarn with the right hand. This is generally how I purl. So there are times when, on occasion, I will want to knit continental or hold the yarn in my left hand. There's a lot of people who say holding your yarn in your left hand and picking at your stitches can make you much faster. I think it ultimately depends on your experience with knitting with these stitches and how much practice time you spend knitting these stitches in this way. So this is how I would knit continental. So into the stitch and then capturing the yarn and then pulling it through. So this would be picking. So again, I try to keep all the stitches as close as possible to the tip of the needle. And then I minimize this length as well. I don't want that yarn to be too long, because then, again, you're increasing your movements of your arms and your wrists and everything, and it can cause strain after some period of time. So you want to try and keep that distance as minimal as possible. So keep it small, tight, minimal movements, minimal distance. So this is generally how I would knit if I were to knit continental. When I purl with the continental style, I actually have to pull my finger down like so to form all these purl stitches. I feel like my tension is not even on both the knit side and the purl side when I do this. I feel like these purl stitches take more yarn than if I were to knit with this method. I did a couple of years ago learn another way of purling, and it's called the Norwegian purl. And the idea is when you're knitting with the continental, your yarn is held in the back all the time. So you're making a knit stitch like this. When you're purling, the yarn is in the front. And so this is how I would conventionally purl with continental. So to do a Norwegian purl, I hold the yarn in the back of your knitting, and then with the right-handed needle, I go behind that yarn, go through the stitch that I want to knit, and then wrap my right-handed needle around that yarn in the back, and then pull it through to the back, and then I've made my purl stitch. So I'll show you that again. Yarn is in the back, stitch is behind, so yarn is in the back, I go behind into the stitch and then wrap my tip of my right needle around, and then it goes back through that stitch and then off. Show that to you again. Behind, wrap around, through the back, and then off. So the benefit of that is that you're never keeping your yarn here. You don't have to do this back and forth with your finger, minimizing your movement. And so therefore, it's kind of like picking, but picking in through the back. If you keep your distances very short, you can actually get quite quick at this. So that's a Norwegian purl. Now, a couple of years ago, when I took the class with Stephanie Pearl McPhee, I learned her technique, which is called Irish lever knitting. And so that, again, is a technique where you have the yarn in your right hand. So finally, a couple of years ago, like I said, I took the class with Stephanie Pearl McPhee to learn about Irish lever knitting. So lever knitting is, rather than holding your hands on top of your needles like so, with lever knitting, you hold your right-handed needle like a pencil. So you come from underneath. And so this is how you're holding your needle as you work. So rather than on top, you're holding from underneath. Then there's another point, which is to tension your yarn a little bit differently. So rather than having the first finger hold and tension your yarn, so you want your yarn to be tensioned by your other fingers, which are not as important as perhaps your index finger for manipulating this needle. This is all from muscle memory, but I believe it was like so. And so I am tensioning my yarn with my fourth finger mainly, and then using this finger to help control the needle. So you can see I'm holding the needle as a pencil. I have the yarn tensioned on my other fingers, and then I'm able to make stitches like so. So I'm not great at this. It took a lot of time to practice to get to this point of being able to knit like this. But again, like anything, This is all muscle memory. This is all practice. This is all, the more and more you do this, the better and better you'll get. So if you were to knit in this way for 28 days straight, you might find that this becomes a very comfortable method for you. The reason why I didn't do this or continue knitting in this way is because, like you just saw, sometimes when I need to catch this yarn, sometimes this yarn gets picked up and then it just becomes this mess. And so I didn't like that. So I generally just knit with my English style. I find that very comfortable. But again, you can see this could make you pretty quick. Everything feels awkward at the beginning, and then as you practice it, the better and better you'll get. So with purling, I'm very slow at this. So that's what I've got for the various knitting styles and the various ways that you can hold and tension your yarn, holding your needles. I love that there are so many different ways to form stitches. Finally, the last point that I want to make that I think about all the time is something that I learned from Stephanie's class about speed knitting. And she made the comment that the thing that slows you down the most when you're trying to knit a project is making mistakes and having to rip back and then re-knit. That takes up the most time. So in order to try and progress towards the finish line of your project a little bit faster, the best thing to do is to read through your pattern instructions all the way before you begin a project. Then you know what's coming, then you know what to look out for, and hopefully you'll make fewer of those mistakes that require you to stop and figure out, what did I do wrong, and then have to rip back and then lose all that time. So if you can remove those kinds of mistakes, then you can drastically improve your knitting time. And finally, as I have been knitting on the Advent project and working on this sweater and looking at the next thing that I want to make, I've just been thinking a lot about speed and why we want to be so fast. I know that a couple of episodes ago I talked about, having all of these things on your to-do list, or the things that you want to make, things on your queue and your Ravelry queue, all the things that you want to make. There's a lot of stuff to be made. There's a lot of stuff that could be made. But if we're just rushing through it and trying to plow through it to get to the next project, are we not missing out on the enjoyment of just forming each stitch? Like, I love the act of making each stitch. It feels good, it feels comfortable. It's not fun when you have to rush or your hands get sweaty or you get anxious about it. So with this season and December and busyness and craziness and all that kind of stuff, I've been thinking a lot about knitting my Advent project, and every day knitting at a pace that I just enjoy, where I can enjoy every single stitch, enjoy the row, enjoy looking at the stuff that I'm working on, enjoy the colors, and looking at how each stitch is a slightly different color from the previous stitch. Because I'm working with hand-dyed yarns, I get to enjoy the variety of color in there. And so I guess I'm just wondering for myself, why do we want to go so fast? Why are we so obsessed with speed in knitting? Why are we so obsessed with getting faster and faster and finishing projects faster and faster? I know there's a benefit to being able to finish a project and then being able to wear it. But on the other hand, there's also so much enjoyment to be derived just from forming those stitches at whatever speed you feel comfortable with and just enjoying the process. I'd love to hear what you think about this topic, since I know it is a hot button topic for a lot of people, but I'd love to hear about your knitting style, your perspective towards knitting speed and finishing projects and all that kind of stuff. So if you would like to leave a comment below, that would be awesome. You can hit like on this video, and please do hit subscribe, and I will keep coming back with more and more videos like these. So thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one.